the ancient place where humans pushed beyond all limits. They went beyond what was possible. No metal tools, no wheels, no writing, no cities, no governments, no farms to feed a workforce, no cranes, no blueprints, no engineering schools, no architects with titles or salaries or offices. Nothing. And yet, on a limestone ridge in what is now southeastern Turkey, 12,000 years ago, a group of human beings did something that should not have been possible. Something so advanced, so organized, so deliberately precise, that when archaeologists first uncovered it in the 1990s, many of them refused to believe what they were seeing. They thought they had made a mistake. They hadn't. What they found buried beneath that hill, hidden under thousands of years of dirt and silence, was a temple. Not a rough pile of rocks. Not a simple shelter or a crude monument. A real, structured, deliberately designed sacred complex, with massive carved stone pillars arranged in perfect circles, decorated with detailed sculptures of animals, abstract symbols, and human-like figures. It was built in approximately 9600 BC. That is not a typo. 9,600 years before Christ. 12,000 years ago. 6,000 years before the Egyptian pyramids. 7,000 years before Stonehenge. Thousands of years before the invention of the wheel. Thousands of years before the first known cities in Mesopotamia. Thousands of years before writing. Thousands of years before pottery. Before almost everything we associate with the word civilization, there was Göbekli Tepe, and the people who built it were supposed to be incapable of doing so. This is not just the story of a ruin, not just the story of an archaeological discovery. This is the story of a moment in human history when everything we thought we knew was turned upside down. When the past reached forward and grabbed us by the collar and said, "You have been wrong about us. We were never primitive. We were always more than you imagined." This is the story of Göbekli Tepe, the ancient place where humans pushed beyond all limits. For thousands of years, the hill sat there, quiet, unremarkable. Just another rounded ridge in the dry, dusty landscape of the Sanliurfa province of southeastern Turkey, not far from the Syrian border. Local farmers walked past it. Shepherds grazed their flocks on its slopes. The wind moved across it without ceremony. In 1963, a team from the University of Chicago and Istanbul University conducted an archaeological survey of the region. They visited the hill. They noted it. They recorded it as a medieval cemetery because of some broken limestone slabs visible near the surface, and they moved on. Just a medieval cemetery. Nothing interesting. They were off by about 11,800 years. It was not until 1994 that a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt visited the site and immediately knew something was wrong with the previous assessment. The flint tools he found scattered across the surface were not medieval. They were prehistoric. The shape of the hill itself, the way it rose unnaturally from the plain, suggested something beneath. Something buried. Something waiting. Schmidt began excavating. And what came out of the ground over the following years would send tremors through the entire field of archaeology, tremors that are still being felt today. Because what Schmidt found was not a cemetery. It was a temple, the oldest temple on Earth. To understand just how extraordinary this is, you have to understand what was actually pulled from that ground. The site consists of multiple enclosures. At least 20 have been detected so far, though only a fraction have been excavated. Each enclosure is roughly circular or oval in shape and contains a series of large T-shaped limestone pillars arranged around two even larger central pillars. These pillars are not small rocks. The largest ones stand up to 6 meters tall, about the height of a two-story building, and weigh between 10 and 20 tons each. Some of the unfinished pillars still lying in the nearby limestone quarry weigh an estimated 50 tons. Every single one of them was quarried, transported, shaped, and erected by human beings. Human beings without metal tools, without wheeled vehicles, without any of the mechanical advantages we associate with large-scale construction. The surfaces of many pillars are covered in bas-relief carvings. These are not random scratchings. They are detailed, skilled, intentional artwork depicting animals: foxes, snakes, wild boars, cranes, ducks, vultures, scorpions, ants, spiders, lions, and aurochs, the ancient wild ancestor of modern cattle. Some pillars depict human arms and hands along their sides, giving them an almost human silhouette, as if the pillar itself is a stylized person, a figure, perhaps a deity or an ancestor. There are also abstract symbols, H-shapes, crescents, and other geometric forms whose meaning remains, for now, a mystery. The construction quality is remarkable. The pillars were socketed into bedrock footing sockets, positioned with intentional alignment. Some enclosures show clear astronomical orientations. The oldest enclosures, the deepest ones, date to approximately 9600 BC and show, paradoxically, some of the most sophisticated construction of all. The newer layers, built on top, are actually less elaborate, which suggests something deeply unsettling. The people who came later were not building on the genius of those who came before. They were, in some way, declining from an earlier peak. As if the height of human ambition at this site was not the end of the story, but the very beginning. Now here is the question that stops everyone cold. Who were these people? The standard model of prehistory, the one taught in schools around the world, goes something like this. For most of human prehistory, people were hunter-gatherers. Small bands of nomads, following animals and seasons, living hand-to-mouth, with no permanent settlements, no complex social organization, no specialization of labor, and no capacity for the kind of large-scale coordinated effort that building a structure like Göbekli Tepe would require. Farming changed all that. Farming created surplus food. Surplus food freed some people from the constant search for calories. Free people could specialize. Specialization created complexity. Complexity created cities, writing, religion, art, and eventually civilization. That is the story. Farming first. Civilization second. Göbekli Tepe breaks that story completely. The people who built Göbekli Tepe were hunter-gatherers. We know this because of what is found in the sediment layers around the site. Animal bones and plant remains that are 100% wild. There is no evidence of domesticated animals. No evidence of cultivated grain. These were people who hunted gazelle and wild boar and gathered wild plants. People who, according to everything we thought we knew, should not have had the social organization, the time, or the motivation to build something like this. And yet they built it. Klaus Schmidt estimated that constructing even one of the enclosures at Göbekli Tepe would have required the coordinated labor of at least 500 people working together over an extended period. To feed 500 workers, you need a food surplus. To organize 500 workers, you need leadership, communication, and social hierarchy. To build what they built, you need specialized skills: quarrymen, stone carvers, architects, and engineers by another name. The most likely answer is that the region around Göbekli Tepe, 12,000 years ago, was extraordinarily rich in wild resources. The foothills of the Taurus and Zagros mountains at the end of the last ice age were, researchers believe, dense with wild game and wild grains, so abundant that large groups of hunter-gatherers could gather seasonally without farming, because nature itself provided the surplus. They came, perhaps, from across a wide region. They gathered at this ridge for a purpose we can only begin to guess at. They organized, they fed each other, and they built. Not because they had to, because they chose to. And that choice leads us to one of the most revolutionary ideas in modern archaeology. Before Göbekli Tepe, the dominant theory of how civilization began looked like a staircase. You develop agriculture. Agriculture creates surplus food and settled communities. Settled communities develop social complexity. Complexity generates religion, art, and monumental architecture. In other words, first you eat, then you build temples. Klaus Schmidt looked at Göbekli Tepe and proposed the opposite. What if it was the temple that came first? What if the desire to gather in a sacred place, to worship together, to build something transcendent? What if that desire was the engine that drove the agricultural revolution, not the other way around? What if humans invented farming not because they were hungry, but because they needed to feed the pilgrims? This idea, that religion, or at least collective ritual, may have preceded and caused the development of agriculture, is one of the most provocative and debated ideas in modern archaeology. It has not been proven. It has not been disproved. But Göbekli Tepe is the only site we know of that makes this idea even plausible. Because if Schmidt is right, even partially right, it means that the first great human ambition was not survival. It was not food. It was not power. It was meaning. It means that 12,000 years ago, human beings were already asking the questions we still ask today. Who are we? Why are we here? What is this world, and what do we owe to it? And their answer was, let us build something that lasts. Look at the carvings on the pillars of Göbekli Tepe, and you are looking at a picture of a world now gone. The animals depicted there, foxes, vultures, scorpions, snakes, wild boars, cranes, were not random choices. Researchers believe they carried symbolic or spiritual significance for the people who carved them. In many ancient cultures, animals represent spiritual forces, clan identities, or cosmic powers. The vulture, for instance, appears frequently at the site and may have been associated with death and the passage of souls. Vultures were known to consume the bodies of the dead in the ancient Near East, a practice that gave them a sacred role in the transition between life and death. The snakes, dozens of them, slithering across the stone, may have represented the underworld, or danger, or transformation. In many of the world's oldest mythologies, the snake is a creature of power and mystery. Its presence at Göbekli Tepe, carved in a time before writing, suggests that some of humanity's oldest symbolic associations were already being formed right here, on this hill, 12,000 years ago. Some researchers have suggested that specific enclosures were dedicated to specific animals or spiritual purposes, that Göbekli Tepe was not one uniform temple but a complex of different sacred spaces, each with its own identity and function. And then there are the central pillars. In each enclosure, two larger pillars stand at the center, their T-shaped tops like broad shoulders, their surfaces carved with arms, hands, and garment-like markings. These are not abstract shapes. They look like beings, human-like figures, larger than the rest, presiding over the space. Are they gods, ancestors, priests, supernatural guardians? We don't know. And perhaps we never will, because the people who carved them left no written record, no explanation, no key to their meaning. They built in stone but wrote in silence. What we can say is this: 12,000 years ago, humans were creating complex symbolic systems. They were expressing ideas about the world, about animals, about death, about forces beyond the visible, in durable, public, monumental form. They were making art not to survive, but to communicate something that mattered to them deeply. They were, in every meaningful sense of the word, people. Fully human, fully thinking, fully feeling. But there is one more chapter to the story of Göbekli Tepe, one that took researchers a long time to process, because it is so strange and so deliberate that it almost seems impossible. Göbekli Tepe was intentionally buried. Around 800 BC, roughly 1600 years after the first enclosures were built, the site was deliberately filled in. Thousands of tons of flint, animal bones, and soil were used to cover the structures. The process was clearly organized. This was not erosion, not a slow collapse, not a disaster. It was a choice. Someone, many people, decided to bury their own sacred site. Why? We do not know. Theories abound. It may have been a ritual act of closure, a kind of sacred burial of the temple itself, mirroring how the people buried their dead. It may have been done to preserve the site, to protect it from destruction. It may have been a response to changing beliefs, old gods buried, new gods rising. It may have been practical. Burying the old enclosures provided a stable foundation for building new ones on top. Whatever the reason, the act of intentional burial speaks to a level of cultural planning that goes far beyond simple survival. You do not bury a building unless the building means something to you, unless it holds a significance so great that its end must be marked, honored, and preserved. And because they buried it, we found it. 12,000 years later, the dirt they packed around those pillars kept them safe, kept the carvings crisp and clean, kept the stones in position. The act of burial that ended Göbekli Tepe's life as a living temple was also the act that ensured its survival as a message to the future. They went beyond what was possible, and then they made sure we would know it. It would be dishonest to tell this story without acknowledging how much we still do not know. And the honest truth is, we know very little. We do not know the name of the people who built it. We do not know their language, their political structure, or the specific nature of their beliefs. We do not know the precise purpose of the site, whether it was a temple, a gathering place, an astronomical observatory, a burial site, or some combination of all of these. We do not know exactly how the stones were moved and erected. We have theories, ramps, ropes, rollers, large coordinated teams of workers, but no direct evidence of the specific techniques used. We do not know who the beings on the central pillars are. We do not know why the site was buried when it was. We do not know what happened to the people who built it. Did they disperse? Did they settle nearby and become some of the earliest farmers of the Fertile Crescent? Did their descendants go on to build the first cities of Mesopotamia? We do not know. And this not knowing is itself part of the power of this place. It humbles us. It reminds us that the past is not a solved problem. It is a mystery, vast and deep, and we have barely scratched its surface. Every answer here opens 3 new questions. Every stone, when studied and translated into meaning, tells us something new about who we were, and confronts us with everything we still don't understand. Less than 5% of the site has been excavated. The rest lies waiting beneath the hill. 12,000 years of waiting. A little longer won't hurt. Stand at Göbekli Tepe today, if you ever have the chance, and look out from that limestone ridge toward the horizon. The landscape is dry and golden and ancient. The plains of the Fertile Crescent spread before you. In the distance, the mountains of the Taurus Range rise blue and hazy against the sky. 12,000 years ago, someone stood on this same ridge and looked at this same view. Someone with the same eyes as you. The same brain. The same nervous system. The same capacity for wonder, for ambition, for longing, for fear, and for the particular human madness that makes a person look at a 20-ton block of stone and decide to move it. They had less than you. They had almost nothing, by any material measure. They didn't have what you have right now in your pocket. They didn't have medicine or electricity or written language. They didn't have history, they were making it. And they decided, from that position of radical material poverty, to do something extraordinary. To gather thousands of people. To quarry and carve and lift and arrange stones that no individual could have moved alone. To create a sacred space that would last not for decades or centuries, but for millennia. They did it without knowing we would find it. They did it for themselves, or for their gods, or for each other, or for something we have no word for in any modern language. But they did it. And 12,000 years later, here we are, smarter in some ways, more comfortable in almost every way, surrounded by tools and machines and systems they could not have imagined, still looking at what they made and still struggling to explain how. That is the gift of Göbekli Tepe. Not just the archaeological data, not just the revised timeline of human history. The gift is the reminder that the human capacity to go beyond, to push past what is comfortable, what is safe, what is expected, what is considered possible, is not modern. It did not begin with the Industrial Revolution or the Renaissance or the ancient Greeks. It began here, in the Stone Age, on a limestone hill in Turkey, 12,000 years ago, when a group of people who had no business building a temple built the greatest temple the world had ever seen. There is a question that has haunted every civilization that has ever existed on this planet. Every culture, every religion, every philosophy has wrestled with it in one form or another. What are we capable of? At Göbekli Tepe, 12,000 years ago, the answer given was, more than you think. More than anyone thinks. More than what the evidence of today's tools and today's knowledge would suggest. More than what comfort demands or survival requires. The people of Göbekli Tepe did not need to build what they built. Survival did not require it. No predator was driven away by carved foxes on limestone pillars. No hunger was fed by T-shaped monuments. No practical problem was solved by arranging 20-ton stones in a perfect circle on a hilltop. They built it because they were human. And being human means reaching beyond necessity. It means building things that have no reason to exist except that we imagined them and wanted them to be real. It means asking questions that have no practical payoff. It means gathering together not just to hunt and eat, but to make something that will last, something that will mean something, something that will say to the future, we were here and we were more than our circumstances. Göbekli Tepe is the oldest proof of that impulse. The oldest place on Earth where we can see, carved in stone, the evidence that human beings have always been this way. Always restless. Always ambitious. Always reaching. The site was discovered only 30 years ago. It has been studied intensively for barely 2 decades. 95% of it remains underground. Every year, new excavations bring new discoveries, new questions, new revisions of what we thought we knew. The story of Göbekli Tepe is not finished. It has barely begun. And perhaps that is the most fitting ending. Because the story it tells, the story of humans going beyond what is possible, is also never finished. It continues in every generation. In every person who looks at a problem and refuses to accept that it cannot be solved. In every community that decides to build something larger than any individual could build alone. 12,000 years ago, on a ridge in ancient Anatolia, human beings pushed beyond all limits. The question is not whether they did it. The question is, what will you do with the world they left you?